And today I'm extremely excited to be their representative.
So lots of NAR discussions, obviously, that we can hear in the news and the media and social media, just conversations that I've had with agents. And it goes all the way from, the sky is falling to we're not doing anything because nothing's happening yet. So, and everything in between. And just based off the conversations that we've had regarding the situation or the issues, I think you're good sounding board, and you fall kind of somewhere in the middle where the sky is not falling, but obviously there's some preparation that needs to be done. So hopefully this will be helpful not only for other agents who may watch this video, but also just for lenders to see what the agents are seeing and hearing, and where are the gaps and where can we assist if needed. So to get started, I do want to just kind of introduce you so people know what your qualifications are, what makes you qualified to even speak subject. Everybody's talking about everything. Everybody has their own opinion. But if we just stick to the facts on what that is, and just a little bit of background about you, that I know personally, you're retired from the military as a chief master sergeant, and once a chief, always a chief. So for anybody who may be watching that is not familiar with military ranks or even Air Force ranks, that is the highest enlisted rank that you can achieve in the Air Force. And not only did you do that, but you did that under 20 years, correct?
Yes.
Which is awesome, because only 1% of military people achieve that rank. And it's very difficult to achieve under 20 years. So you did that, and that just goes to your work ethic and to your dedication to serve others. And you have translated that into the civilian world and into the civilian, into your civilian career in real estate. And so in addition to that, I also learned that you're a licensed program manager, right?
Yes, ma'am. I'm a licensed broker and I manage a team here in San Antonio.
Excellent. So that program manager hat is definitely important when it comes to, being a broker and a team lead. And then in addition to that, if that's not enough, I also learned that you are or that you hold a certified ninja designation, which you probably didn't know this, but while we were having that conversation, I was Googling it because I thought you were like kidding me. I thought you were talking about like walking around in pajama bottoms with a belt type
And a
of
belt.
But it's a thing. A certified ninja designation certainly has taught you a lot that has helped you achieve or continue to achieve success in your current career. So I do want to talk a little bit about that in just a second. But just to kick everything off, I do want to start talking about just what the facts are. And the fact is that I think it was over a couple years ago, there were some sellers that filed a class action lawsuit alleging that the NAR Commission rules, as they are stated now, violate antitrust laws. That's like the gist of it, right? So we can go down many rabbit holes as far as like how they got to that point and why they wanted to move forward. Did you want to add anything to that? Or is
I mean, this has been going on for a long time in the background. I'm certainly not an attorney. I've read the portions of the suit or the settlement that are applicable to what our discussion is today. I'll just use that as a disclaimer. I don't speak for any of the organizations that she's talking about. Like, yes, I'm a ninja selling certified agent. It is a thing. I'm also a consumer residential specialist, which is the highest designation in residential real estate. I don't speak for any of those firms. I'm just kind of giving you my opinion and sharing my thoughts to, help agents navigate through this. But in general, the class action lawsuit has been ongoing, and it's got, they're at a point where they're getting ready to settle, and that's been the news, the media, the clickbait everybody sees. Right now, there's a lot of negative tone to it, and so what does it all mean? How is it going to affect our business? That's really what the conversation is about. I always joke around and I say, I'm just a dude on YouTube, talking to you. So talk to your broker, talk to your attorneys about practices, what may work for me, may not work for you. But in general, yeah, there's been issues with how commissions have been advertised, cooperating brokerage specifically. Lack of disclosure is part of that. Just how do you disclose that fee? How do you explain it? From my practices, I think I mentioned this to you during one of our discussions, right? Like if agents focus on certain things, they'll be okay, right? Like, and I'll get into that as we go along, but in general, that's the gist behind it is yes, there's, like the cooperative compensation being advertised on the MLS has been a problem for years now. There's still other stuff going on. This is the seller suit that we're talking about that has been going on. There's other suits out there and guidelines that, can change. But what we got going on right now, it's not implemented just yet. Some markets are getting ahead of it. In the area here, we're just trying to make sure we're clear on what the rules are, what sellers can do, what buyers need to know, and sellers need to know. And so that's kind of what the gist of our conversation is going to be today.
Perfect. So great segue into one of the two key terms. So I want to focus on really just two of the key terms of the settlement. And like you said, this is just a proposed settlement, if you will, and nothing is in stone until July, or expected to be in July, correct?
Well, yeah, a judge needs to sign off on it. I guess there was a sign off late Friday to allow it to move forward. So there's different stages of it where, in the settlement, certain organizations that gross over a certain volume, I think it's 2 billion, have a different process they need to follow. Anything less than 2 billion, or certain organizations are already covered. The NAR.facts website has a fact sheet where you could go in and it kind of breaks all those deals down. But that's kind of, the timing of it. The final action on it will be sometime in November. But there's a part of it that has practice changes that are going to be required to be implemented at a certain point in time, and that's by late July if everything goes as planned. There's like a final sign off and some other things that need to happen on a judicial standpoint, but that's well beyond, my scope of expertise.
Right. Okay. Good stuff. So we'll just focus on the two main
Yeah.
terms of the agreement, which is number one is that written agreements for MLS participants acting for buyers will be required. So can you just talk about like how are you approaching that before, and what changes, if any, are you making now to prepare for that?
Honestly, like I think this goes back to just how I've been trained and coached over the years. Um, I have a process for what I do for everything that I do. I'm very process driven and oriented. So what I can say is, to kind of steal this from Larry Kendall and what he sent out to all the ninjas out there is, from a buyer process standpoint, you have uh, it broken down in a few different ways, right? Like, if you look at it from a process standpoint, you go, okay, step one, step two, step three. Step one in the buyer process, from a general, if you're grouping everything together is really the concept here. So you're going to do a consultation, right? And then step two would be once the consultation's done and you have a game plan, then step two in what I do is now we're going to go look for the property, right? Um, it's not just looking at the property, it's getting max exposure. What's the plan? what's the process, what are we going to do when we go out, what are we not going to do. You know, when we look at properties, like we don't just get up and go start running to show properties. And I think that's the issue behind the intent of what's going on with that particular portion of the practice changes. So step one, consultation. Step two, show the property. Step three, in broad terms, is get the property under contract and then manage that from contract to close as a procuring cause of sale to make that experience for a consumer enjoyable. Make sure they're informed throughout the process, and we're doing our due diligence through inspection, clue report, order up, all the things that sometimes get forgotten when you start going super fast. Like, we have a way to address that. So I I can tell you from what I've seen as a manager and just what I've seen throughout the years. And listen, I started in the business too with just getting going, and I had to learn my process, right? And so I think this will force agents to have an act one or a play or step one to their overarching process. You can't ignore the the consultation process, because that's where it all starts, right? A consultation isn't just that initial phone call, in my opinion. It's going, hey, just like when you're, you know, I mean, everyone knows, I guess, if they're watching this through your channel, you're a licensed mortgage professional, and you have a conversation initially, but you get on a call to talk business, disclose fees, kind of get a feel for the client, get them to pre-qualify, those kinds of things. um, it's kind of the same concept. You're not going to allow them to put in an offer before they talk to you, right? Like, it's just not how it goes. So from a real estate sales standpoint, if you get a call and it's like, hey, I want to go look at this property that's on the MLS, um, there's going to be a little bit more of a conversation that should be going into that to meet the intent of the practice changes and have an agreement that clearly states what your fee is, how this will work. And you know, different organizations are going to address this in different ways. Each individual brokerage will likely have policies that they, you know, that they will put in place and forms that they'll implement to make sure they meet the intent of the practice changes. But you know, I kind of use the concept of the Pop-Tart agent when I teach it, right? So the phone rings, you get a lead from, you pick a lead service, it doesn't matter. And it's like, okay, yeah, I could show you the property. Well, first off, there's some safety issues there, right? Like, let's do some due diligence and let's know who we're working with, right? It kind of allows us to take a step back and take control of the process. And that's kind of, for me, that's the ninja way, right? Like, there's a process, you know, the client controls the decision, we control the process to help them and make sure we can advise them along the way. And so it starts with that consultation. And I think whatever the, you know, different brokerages and real estate services put in play, you know, you'll get all sorts of great ideas that come up of this, I'm sure, you know. But I don't think it's going to change much for myself, because I go through a process and we do documentation up front. We try to teach that. Sometimes, you know, the objection I've been getting from people is like, well, they're not answering the call, they're blowing me off, or I can't even get them to initial an IABS. How am I going to get them to sign an agreement? And the concept here is like, you got to slow things down and make sure this isn't about um, agents getting paid, right? Like, it is a payment issue, but we got to take a step back and look as a consumer too. We've all bought and sold houses or bought and sold cars and bought and sold high ticket items where we weren't represented. You know, now to get representation for perhaps the biggest expense that you'll ever make. Um, I know people that have bought three, four times. I'm working with some right now that are still using me and appreciate my services. And I go through my process and I explain how the fees work, what the expectation is. And, you know, that kind of gets into the next topic that we're going to talk about. But in general, I think if you have a process, tighten it up with what the new guidelines are and make sure you're making a special point to treat your business like a business, right? Um, Sit down, have a conversation, utilize this beautiful Zoom platform, whether the client's here or not. You can start to work with a prospect to build that concept of fiduciary trust, make sure you go into, uh, it's all about money. There's a couple people on this call that I know personally that will tell you it's every decision is about money, and you have to feel comfortable talking about that. And so I think if you just focus on the process and make sure that you're explaining what the issues are, that most people will understand the value you bring. You got to show a value proposition. What are you doing? None of the fees on that sheet that you sign are fixed. Everything's negotiable, right? So there's no set fee. You can have a fee that you start with, and that's what your fee for service is. And you got to explain your value proposition, right? So what's your superpower as an agent? Like focus on that. If you're like everybody else, you're gonna have people that will go and talk to, like most people will know another agent, right? But what is your superpower as an agent? Focus on your value proposition and do that consultation so it's clarity. This isn't just a how do I get compensated as an agent discussion. This is a consumer protection issue. And that's why the rules are changing, to make sure there's clarity in fees and the consumers know what to expect moving forward. And that's really what it's about in my opinion.
I'm just taking some notes here just because I think you have a lot of good inputs that I want to recap at the end. Um,
Mhm.
but when it comes to your value proposition for individuals that may be newer, like how did you develop that? Like how did you come up with that? Or how does a new agent sell themselves when they're new and they don't have a lot of experience that they can fall back on or show the buyer or seller like this is what you're working with?
Yeah, I think there's a few different ways for that. Like when I first got in business, I partnered myself with a high producing small brokerage, and I had a mentor, and I didn't feel like I showed up to training. I showed up to learn. I did all the practice things that my broker told me to do so I could be comfortable and competent with the paperwork and kind of understand the process. If you don't show up and you don't seek out the coaching, the training, and become curious in your profession, it just takes longer for things to happen and then you forget, right? But I think partnering yourself with the right people in business is important. Every company I've been part of has had years of experience beyond me, right? And so, bragging on your team, the attorneys you have on staff, the broker you have access to, if you're part of a team, hey, the team's production and value that they bring, the process, all that is part of your value proposition too. Um, and I think that's really, I think for me, it was one of those things where I kind of started a traditional business. I pounded the pavement and tried to build my business from the inside out. I know a lot of people do different things to get leads, but once I started to build my database, I needed to start to connect with folks. And honestly, everybody knows the big three companies out there providing leads. I was one of those agents for all three of them at the same time. And so, in starting to do that and then going out and just showing properties to people, I started to feel like there was a gap. I was missing something, right? And I think it was that process. Like I was doing certain things to connect with people, and I wanted to take control of my business. So that's where I started to seek out other sources of learning, like the Ninja thing you brought up, like CRS, um, and just start to build. The Graduate Real Estate Institute is a great organization that teaches agents three key skills, right? I'm also GRI, and several of you guys on this call are as well. Um, you know, Going from contract to close, how do you handle that? What are the key things? How do you negotiate? So a value proposition is developed over time, right? And it's not something that's going to happen overnight. I've had new agents go, well, I'm not like that other agent, I'm hungry, that's not going to work. Everybody's hungry, right? Nobody's going to work for free. You need to kind of go, hey, listen, these are some things that I can provide to you. I've been a professional in a previous career, and I think I lean on that as well. Like servant leadership is important to me. Project management is important to me. Starting with the end in mind. You'll read things like that in different books, but timeline working backwards to show that you genuinely care in the person you're working with and their timeline for their families or themselves, their job relocation, whatever the case may be. I think your value proposition really is something, you could do an elevator pitch and, I jumped into the civilian sector as well for a little bit as soon as I got out of the service. But the bottom line is I'm going to outwork everybody, and my superpower is attention to detail and providing you a different experience from contract to close. I will be there for you. I got feedback yesterday. I'm working with, trust me, more than one buyer right now and more than one seller. There's a handful, but what I try to make people feel is that I like literally, I can't remember exactly how they put it, but I feel like I'm your only client. Okay.
Mhm.
And that right there is important. So if that's your only client, then you should be answering your phone. You should be focusing on all those things. If I could do that working with 20 to 40 people at the same time, then you need to have a process if you're a new agent to do it one at a time and focus on your craft and learn. A lot of times people go, oh, well, just go out there and sell, and that's true. You need to find prospects. This is a sales business, but at the same time, there's a lot of liability that lies in what we do, and it all deals with money. And people want to make sure that, they get the best value, and you gotta be able to tell them what that value is with you. So it takes time to get started, there's no
Right.
doubt. But from what I've learned is if I go into a consultation and I know the numbers, um, I've probably practiced beforehand. I've gone over the numbers. I've asked for advice, and I will sound more polished. You're always going to have questions that come up you can't answer. I get them too. I just answer them to the best of my ability and assure people that I surround myself with a team of professionals that will help me get the right answer for them. I'm not a smoke and mirrors guy. I'm gonna tell you the truth. So just being upfront about the quality you bring. Every single one of us has had to start over from scratch at different companies or different organizations, new professions. So there is kind of like that weird feeling of newness for everybody involved. But I think it's important to go all in, right? Like sometimes, and I'm not getting on my broker or supervisor soapbox, but at the same time, I hear people saying that they want to do something, and then it's like you got to put in the work. You know what I mean? Like for me to repeat multiple transactions over and over again, um, I've gotten to that point because I put in countless hours of work for 7 years prior to this point. And I think that's the hard part for a lot of agents that want to get started. So partner with the right people, focus on becoming a master of your craft, seek out these books. And like a lot of people that I recommend to Ninja, so my value proposition is pretty simple. 1% of people that are licensed will come across that book. 1% that come across the book will actually read it. 1% of those people will go to installation, and 1% of the people that go to the installation will implement it. And so the numbers I'm going to give you, the accuracy on my comparables, they're going to be different. And then, my marketing approach is different than most agents too. So, but in general, like that's how, if I do have somebody ask me and I don't have that established relationship, I do lean on my training and background to show my value to people. So
That's good. That's good feedback. Especially right now, there's a lot of after the past couple years where the market was booming and you could step outside and find five buyers ready to go. Right now,
mhm.
people are struggling to get that same level of business. So everybody's like, how do I develop my value proposition? And especially newer agents I've talked to that are just coming on board. And so that's all really good feedback as to um, partner yourself with a good team. I think it all starts there because um, as long as I've been in, which is not very long, and part of a couple of teams, and not all teams are the same.
Yeah.
So the team that I'm with right now, they're super great, and I plan on being here for a long time, and that's super important. And it took me a while to find that team. I had to talk to a lot of different teams and see what they were about. So it's certainly important to find that team and the training. It's a
Yeah.
constant learning, not just about the business, but processes and
Mhm.
caring too. That's big. So that's good feedback. I appreciate that. Um, so with let me go back. I wrote something down. With the buyer's consultation taking place up front, like has the discussion changed, or has the discussion have you started to include the lender more now than before, to talk about what that looks like in terms of if the seller is not going to pay that uh, compensation? Like,
Yeah.
have you started to have those discussions yet, or that's still kind of like down the line?
So it does bring up a good concept, right? So part of the big discussion is what they've done is they've tried to decouple who pays the commission, right? So that's a big key part of this discussion. So decoupling of commission, simply stated, is the seller will pay for the seller's agent's fee, the buyer will pay for the buyer's agent fee, and there will be different ways that that can happen. The seller can still choose to offer additional concessions to cover that brokerage service fee. Um, and there's still going to potentially be the way where a seller's agent could go in and explain cooperating brokerage and how it works, and they'll be able to still do that. So at the end of the day, there'll be three different ways potentially that could happen. The buyer can certainly pay for it if they can afford it. The seller can still offer compensation through additional concessions, and then I don't know for how long or if this is indefinite, but until it's still a thing, the cooperating brokerage piece is if I go in and I negotiate, um, my fee for service and I explain how things work, whatever that number is, I explain to the seller part of that fee. If you want, we can pre-designate to share with another agent that brings us a buyer. I will take part of that and share it. That's that cooperating brokerage service fee. So there'll be a way to handle that. There'll be, that's the way it works today, right? Like you go into a conversation, you talk with your seller and go, hey, here's how this works. You don't have to offer anything by all means, but if we're gonna make it, if we're gonna advertise and try to get max exposure, then what is a qualified buyer worth to you? We can have that discussion now, and I'll take a portion of that, and that's what I'll offer when we get phone calls asking if there's, if they're going to pay a fee for the brokerage service, if they're willing to pay a portion of it or all of it, or if there's a cooperating agreement that allows it. So the big thing in this, that can't be overlooked in discussing this topic is once it goes into effect, the MLS will not be allowed to advertise what the cooperating brokerage commission is if there is one. So there'll be
Right.
no offer of compensation in the MLS whatsoever. So from a process standpoint, if you're a buyer's agent, when you look at that, we talked about step one was a consultation. Well, step two is that buyer showing process, right? When you are showing properties and trying to find a home, that's going to be part of the work you do because most agreements already state that the fee's negotiable.
Mhm.
At least in our state, it does. It says the fee's negotiable, and we'll seek to get that from the seller's broker, the seller, or If not, then you're responsible for the difference, depending on the loan type, right? Like with VA, it kind of, you can't do that, as you know, and you could correct me if I'm wrong there, but um, that's generally how it works. So um, when this goes into effect, you won't see any offers of compensation related to brokerage services or broker fees, buyer broker fees. None of that will be in the MLS.
Mhm.
That's how the settlement's written. Um, but a seller can choose to do it a couple different ways. They can decide if they want to, they have a number in mind and they go, hey, I will provide a concession. Um, I'd rather do that and see what the offer looks like, but I will pay a buyer's. And so how do you negotiate that? What the forms are going to look like? You're probably not going to be able to willy-nilly it. It's going to be, this is what I'm willing to give. And then that's the number you tell people when they call, because it's got to be fair and standard with everybody.
Sure.
So there'll be some practice changes there. And again, we don't know what that's going to look like. There's organizations that are looking at fixing that, as far as like what needs to change in the contract. Does anything need to change?
Mhm.
All that's the the broker lawyer committee, Trek and Texas Real Estate. They have professionals looking at that now, and eventually there'll be a clear answer for license holders. But what I've been telling my agents is brokers are going to help solve this problem too, right? Because the agreement, if it's an agreement between the agent or the broker and their client, like the brokers can come up with language to address these and have their own forms to make sure we're compliant. So that's probably going to be the quick way that things will happen. So be involved, show up to your team meetings, right? Show up to your broker meetings. Every single person that hears this, they have a broker that has a meeting that's set. Like, now's the time to be involved if you weren't, and make sure you understand so you're compliant and you can serve your clients the right way.
Right. I think it's safe to say that, if agents were communicating a lot through text or through, whatever means, I think it's now more important that that communication takes place in the form of a phone call between the listing and buyer's agents to see, what each party is bringing to the table, if you will. Um,
Yeah, I mean, you're going to have to call to find out.
yeah.
Um, And so how that's all executed and handled individually, that's kind of beyond the scope here. But when we'll get questions. I'm sure people will have some questions here later. How do we work that? How do you handle that situation?
Mhm.
The one I get all the time right now is um, the way the agreement's written is the fee that's negotiated is the fee that's there, right? Like, that's the fee. It could always be less, but it can't be more. So there's builders out there providing incentives of, high, bonuses and things like that. Um, will that change? Probably not. They're still going to try to use it, but what you negotiate is what you're gonna earn in the agreement. And that's really the rule. So how that works, there's different techniques on how to do that. But in general, it's considered kind of unethical to go, hey, well, this person's going to offer me this much, so we need to change it. That's kind of the issue. There's probably going to be a way to handle it that's correct. I mean, you know,
Yeah.
but again, I'm not an attorney and I'm not going to really get into that.
Mhm.
So we'll see how it goes. But in general, what you negotiate as your fee is your fee. So
Mhm.
in theory, if I know I'm going to, work with somebody new, um, you know, maybe the whole thing of having 120-day agreements isn't the case. You know what I mean? Like, you talk up front and you go, hey, if we're going to go look at pre-owned homes, we're going to do this agreement for this time. And, if you decide to buy pre-owned for, you know, when we look at these homes, great. But if we talk about new construction, we'll, you know, we're going to have a separate agreement or something like that after this one expires, like make it short. I don't know. There's ways to do it.
Right,
But all of it involves a conversation, right? And I think that's the point of this, is to be transparent
right,
and let people know, because at the end of the day, new construction for us here in San Antonio is going to be a thing. Like, it's booming here. It's one of those things that makes it to where we're not feeling what some markets are feeling, where the rates are high and it's still multiple offers, and you know, tons of people coming to showings because the inventory is so low. We do have good inventory out here in San Antonio, and there's a lot of shadow inventory that builders can build, right? That you kind of don't even consider. And then there's stuff that's already built that you're competing against, and they're giving the consumer some really good deals. But you know, either way, you should be represented, is my opinion, because having a good agent help you through that process and make sure that your best interests are, you know, at center. I think that's important, just to kind of throw in there real quick.
yeah, for sure. Um, One of the last things I just want to ask you, or if you could just give some feedback on when it comes to working with lenders, like what can the lenders do to best support the agents, or what should agents be looking um, for in lenders in terms of, you know, our assistance or guidance?
Oh, wow. That one's so there's a lot. I mean, right now the interest rates are a thing, you know, when you talk about housing affordability, um, you know, it's really all about interest rates right now. Like, I'm not going to get into the theory behind people thinking that this whole situation or new guidelines and best practices that are going to have to be
Right.
implemented will lower home prices.
Mhm.
I'm a firm believer that that's not going to happen. Really what we have right now is high interest rates. And I think, you know, just take the whole commission discussion or broker fee discussion out of the way, or like, let's not even talk about that for a second. Just from a lending standpoint, me personally, is just educating on just exactly what concessions are needed, you know, what interest rate to put on the third party financing form, because it changes. Like, you know, last week is an example, the rates shifted for the worse late last week. And if somebody was locked at a 6.25, or could have locked at a 6.25, it costs way more to get a 6.25, because you could lock at 6.85 by the end of the week. And it's a lot of money. So just kind of like a communication of, because one of the big questions I get is like, well, what happens if the rate gets better while we're under contract, right? And from lender to lender, you can, you know, there's different ways to handle it. So if you have a way of handling it or a process, I would share it with the agents that you know,
Okay.
so they kind of know what to expect.
Mhm.
A lot of agents don't realize that the rate buy down fees that are out there for like a 2-1 rate buy down, um, plus all the closing costs, exactly what kind of credit that looks like.
Mhm.
So, you know, as we get into the point where we may be asking for the buyer to pay their own brokerage fee, and they're going to get a portion of that from the seller, you know, um, contribution limits. I know Fannie Mae put out a statement mid-April that says, you know, the interested party contributions, the brokerage fee is not going to be considered part of that. I don't know how that's going to plan out, but I think from a lender standpoint, just knowing if there's any concerns with maximum limits for each of the loan types, you know, just kind of be transparent about that up front and have a discussion, so we can be ready to negotiate what we need to help the buyers. Sellers understand, um, real quick, because most sellers are buying somewhere else. So
Yeah.
uh, they're already seeing it from their perspective, you know, as the buyer, more than likely, because they're like, man, you know, what's going on, right? Um, I'm buying it, you know, pick a northeastern state. and there's like 14 offers,
Mhm.
so they're seeing it and the rates are higher. So that means the price is higher, different kind of house, potentially than they expected. So, you know, just there's multiple factors involved there, but I think those are the big things. Like what are people doing to get into a home, right? Um, that's what my sellers are asking me, like, how are people doing this, right? And so then I get into the rate buy down and, just being that voice. That's what I love about, your market update text messages and that kind of stuff. Like getting that information out there is super helpful. And it kind of allows me to be able to understand what's going on. So just build your database and make sure that you're sending updates to what's going on, I think, from a lender standpoint. But that's usually what I need. Like, hey, what do I really need? I know you can't. So estimates are important too for most of my clients that are looking to buy. They're like, well, what do you mean I can't get an estimate until I go under contract? Like the loan estimate is a part of the deal when you go under contract, but like, hey, what does it look like for me up front? And I think I've dealt with some different lenders that are like, hey, this is going to be sticker shock, or we can't really estimate the fees because it changes day to day. Just throwing it out there so people know what to expect. You got to be transparent. So
Yeah.
I think that's one of the reasons that I enjoy working with you is you are transparent and you're straightforward with the numbers and just focus on affordability, right? Like that's the key.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Um, that was a lot of good information. I did like the fact that you said, where did I write it? I wrote too many notes, but you said something about it's a consumer protection
Yeah.
issue, not a commission issue, because that's what we're hearing. It's they're attacking your commission, they're attacking, whatever clickbait is going to
Yeah.
garner the most attention, but that's truly what it is. It's a consumer protection issue. How can we be transparent? How can we help the consumer make the biggest purchase of their lives
Yeah.
possibly?
Yeah. Because I mean, you've always been able to go straight to the seller, right? And if they're represented, then, now you're going against a single-sided represented party and you got to fend for yourself. Some people can do that. You have experienced buyers out there that are 2, 3, 4, 5, 12 time buyers that do this all the time. My worry is less about that. My worry is about somebody that wants to make sure, like everybody has their own profession, right? Like their own day-to-day thing they're doing. When they look for somebody to represent them, they're looking for somebody to represent their best interests and to make sure they're not making a bad decision. You know what I mean? So
Right.
um, it's such an important thing that I think we just forget the fact that buyers need representation to navigate the market. You could buy 15 different times and then move to Texas and never have bought in a state that had a termination option. And how
Right.
does that work? You know,
Yeah.
um, is it a big deal? No, you could do a ton of Google research, but if you don't turn in money on time at the right place, and then you lose that right to terminate, then it's like, okay, then I get phone calls like, hey Seb, I have a question. And I'm like, hey, are you represented? No, right? But here, so you want my advice to help you, and now we're sitting here and we're trying to fix something. So it's really about making sure people get the right information and the right representation, um, and they understand what they're getting into financially.
Sure.
That's
Yeah.
really, is it going to be difficult to figure out some of this process stuff? Sure, it will. But if you figure it out, you're going to be well equipped to take care of whoever it is that decides to work with you. Like you gotta be ready to earn that business
Yeah.
and earn trust. So um,
Yeah.
focus on the process. That's one of the most neglected things that I have seen is it's like, yeah, let's go shopping, right? Let's go shopping. And then next thing you know, there's there's no paperwork, there's no disclosures that are sent. There's certain documents that consumers need to have before they start shopping
Right.
that don't even have anything to do with compensation. That just happens to be the hot ticket item, but like, you know, it's simple. Most brokerages have them, like wire fraud, relationship
Yeah.
disclosures,
Yeah.
information that buyers and sellers need in a real estate transaction to understand. Like they may not read it and they may DocuSign and click, 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 but most of the people that I work with don't do that. They read through it. I provide it to them first
Mhm.
to make sure if they have questions, they can ask me. I clarify it. We go over it on the phone, looking at the same document, and
Mhm.
that's all part of the work, you
Yeah.
know. It's just too important because the last thing you need is someone that goes, well, I didn't get that from my agent, you know, and then it's like, okay, like what's a clue report?
Yeah.
A lot of agents don't know what a clue report is, and it's one of the basic staples of uh, you know, finding out what's going on with the property. It's like the Carfax for a car. Why wouldn't you want to know that and compare that to the seller's disclosure?
Mhm.
That could be your value proposition, right? Like I'm giving people ideas to give them a sense of what they can add to their process or how they can partner with people that can help them
Mhm.
streamline their process and enforce it, at the same time. Good insurance professional, good mortgage lenders, build your team. There goes your value proposition right there. Like a lot of people say they have a team. I have a team.
Mhm.
And here's a picture of a list of my team members. If you need anything at all, you can always reach out to me, but here's my insurance guy. Here's the three inspectors, all that stuff. You could focus on building those relationships and finding the right people that bring value to you and your clients. And I
Mhm.
think that's a big part of this business and the transparency we need to provide to folks. So it goes beyond the brokerage service fee. Like people need to know what they're getting for that fee, and if you can show the value, most of them will want to work with you.
Mhm.
They'll see the value in it.
For sure. Awesome. Well, thanks, Seb. This was really a lot of good information, a lot of good input from you. You obviously have a lot of experience, have great processes, you have a great team. Um, you're busy all the time, so you were the perfect person to
Thank you. I
do
appreciate
this.
it.
Do we have any questions from anybody online?
There's got to be one. Come on. It's the
Derek,
hot button topic. You can't get out of asking at least one question.
Don.
Well, Don is one of those agents that's always out there hustling and in the training and in the coaching calls and staying informed. So
Good.
I have a question.
what's up?
Um, so when you're at a listing presentation and you have a seller that is following the lawsuit and they want to jump the gun early and offer to not pay the buyer at all, say, hey, listen, like I'll pay you your fee, but I don't want to compensate the buyer at all. How do you handle that or discuss it?
I always tell them that, I mean, kind of like take a step back, right? Like you get to a point where in a conversation where that comes up, or you get punched in the face with it right when you walk in the door, right? And I've had both happen to me. One is know your company's position on it, right? So if you're part of a brokerage, like know what their position is on how they're handling those things. Um, the fact is all the details of the full implementation of this have like they're not official, they're not approved yet. A lot of states don't have the forms that Texas has, so they're early implementing certain things, right? So I can't speak to all of them, but what I tell them is I just sit back and I go, hey, here's paragraph 5, and this is the overarching brokerage service fee, right? And you don't have to pay anything to a cooperating, broker. You don't have to pay any fee. It's up to you how you want to handle that. And if they say they don't want to, I just go, okay, well, will you let me explain to you kind of how this works right now, right, in today's market? And then I let them make a decision at that point. Do you still want to provide nothing, right? Or do you want to provide some sort of compensation as a motivation? Because let's be honest with it, right? Like the way it works today is I'm negotiating a certain amount that um, is going to provide maximum exposure. Like that's the goal, is to provide maximum exposure of the property to have it put out everywhere. And you can come out at zero right now and still offer, you can do that. It's just based on how things currently run. When you're out there and someone's trying to schedule a showing, if because the fee is advertised the way it is right now in the MLS, there's a chance that somebody might not show it. Unfortunately, that's just the risk that you take. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but I would say this is going to be market specific, right? And brokerage specific. Um, there's another paragraph in our listing agreement that is paragraph 8, and it goes into how that process works. So I go, this is what it is, and then I go to that and I just explain what that is. And most sellers see it as, okay, so I can plan on that. And whether it's 2% or 1% or 3%, whatever the percentage is, if they want to do a flat fee, like I just talk them through it and I explain it. I tell them you don't have to do any of it, but here's the implication potentially of it as the system works right now. And what I've been telling people is when these changes happen and they're implemented, I will redisclose and we will renegotiate. That way you feel comfortable with it and you understand what's going on from a broader perspective, of the actual implementation of the suit. So, um, and I let them know that right now, this is kind of how it is. You don't have to, and they could certainly choose not to. But the big thing is making sure they understand the impact of not doing that, whether it's advertised or not, right? Because just to get a buyer in the door right now, and a lot of agents can attest. I go to like different functions across the city. I look at the stats every day. There's some new construction homes that have been 690 days on the market, right? Like if that's happening on new construction, you want to make sure that your home's priced right, and you want to make sure that if somebody's going to bring you a qualified buyer, you want to consider paying them for their service. Nobody's going to work for free, right? Like you go to work, you negotiate your fee with your employer, and you get paid for your work. And so that's kind of the same thing, to just put the house on the market and not consider, especially in San Antonio, that we're in Military City, USA, and there's some pretty severe restrictions with VA lending guidelines. I just make sure I let them know kind of how that works. And that way they can make an informed decision that they feel is best for them. But I make it clear to them, this is how brokerage service fees work. They're all negotiable. You can pay this percent, you could pay this percent, you could pay this percent, or you could pay no percent. It's totally up to you. But let me explain to you how it does work. And I explain to them how it works. And I have not had a problem with that in the past. So it's all about transparency.
Cool. Um, that's all I had, Seb. Thanks to everybody, especially you, Seb, for taking time out of your day. I really appreciate you just being willing to offer all of your advice and some of your perspective from your experience.
Yeah, I hope when you share this, it'll help some agents kind of, put some different perspective behind it. I try to be a master in my craft, not to cut you off, but just kind of end with this, like follow what the trade groups are doing, follow what's happening, right? Like, I've spent hours watching broker lawyer commission meetings where they meet to talk about this stuff. All that information's out there in public space. If you're truly out there trying to serve and make sure you can navigate this properly and run a business and take care of your clients to the best of your ability, just be involved and focus on your process. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely for everybody out there watching this, listening to this, make sure you go out there and you grind, you execute, and you hustle.
Oh, there you go. Look at that. Bam. Pew, 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 pew. Right. All right.
All right. Thanks, Thanks,
Yep.
everybody. Good
Y'all
day.
take care. Have a good one.